Hello, my name is 환산스님, and this is Sun Meditation in English. The purpose of this program is to share the Buddhist teachings of Sun Master Songdam with a modern international audience. So for you viewers at home, are you sitting on your meditation mats or your chairs? Okay, that's great. Today's topic for contemplation and meditation is coping with addictive behaviors. I think it's safe to say that with the possible exception of enlightened folks, practically everyone has to deal with this problem in one form or another. The various kinds of addiction and addictive behavior have always been with us. I think that they are a part of every society and culture in the world. And in fact, they almost seem like a part of the human condition, or more precisely, the unenlightened condition. And yet still, I think, these days, when I look around me, I feel like there's more and more addictive behavior. And what I mean by that is this. Last year, I began going into Seoul on a regular basis to teach meditation to college students. And that meant taking 2-hour rides on the subways. And actually, it was the first time that I'd ridden the subways in a long time. So when I got on the subway, the first thing that I noticed was that almost everybody on the train was looking at their smartphones or some other kind of video device. Now, when I first came to Korea more than 20 years ago, and I rode the subways for the first time back then, the first thing I noticed back then was that everyone was holding a book. Most of the passengers were holding technical books related to their jobs or their careers or their field of study or whatever. And of course, even back then, there were a lot of Koreans trying to learn English. But flash forward back to the present, I get on the subway for the first time and practically everyone is staring into their cell phone. And I know this may sound old-fashioned, but I found it a little disturbing. The whole atmosphere is a little weird. And the looks on people's faces is also a little weird. I feel like I'm the only one on the train, the only one awake anyway. It's like I'm on a train with a bunch of heavily medicated people. And actually, even more disturbing than that is the effect that I found that this atmosphere has on me. Now, I do own a smartphone, but when I get on a subway, I like to meditate. It's a very pleasant way to pass the time. But even more than that, what's more important than that is that I find that when I meditate, when I arrive at my destination, I'm far less tired and fresher than I would have been if I had not meditated. And that was very important for me on these very long, exhausting 2-hour rides. So actually, I'd like to take a moment to recommend that to all of our participants here today and for all of you viewers at home, that any form of, well, almost any form of public transportation, a bus, a train, a taxi, a ferry, an airplane, whatever, these are great places to meditate. Anytime you're in transit is a great opportunity to fit more meditation into your day. And the way you do that, the way you meditate on some form of public transportation is this. You take the seat and you put it in the upright position. But you don't have to sit straight up and down because the vehicle is moving. So if you try to sit straight up and down unsupported, you'll start to shake. So it's okay to lean back into the chair. Just make sure that your butt and your lower back are pressed tight up against the back of the chair. And then you can take your hands and you can put them in your lap in normal meditation posture. Or you can also just cup your lower abdomen like this, which is much more unobtrusive. And by doing that, by putting pressure on your belly, it's easier to focus on your dantian or your energy center in your lower abdomen. And as in normal meditation, you tuck in your chin slightly, and you take the tip of your tongue and place it against the roof of your mouth. But with your gaze, with your eyes, you want to look down a little bit more than usual. Because if you look straight ahead, you'll make eye contact with the other passengers, and that can be distracting when you're trying to meditate. So you want to look down almost to the floor, and then from there you can just meditate. And you can do all of these things standing up too. So that's something that I'd really like to recommend that everyone try. If you're having trouble trying to make enough time and space for meditation in your daily life, take advantage of the moments when you're in transit on some form of public transportation. Now, getting back to the story. So I'm on the subway for the first time in a long time, and everyone, it seems to me, is staring blindly into their cell phones. And I'm finding that it has an effect on me. When I meditate, and if I start thinking about something else, or if I start to lose focus on the 이목고 화두, suddenly I'm holding the cell phone in my hand. It's really creepy. I sometimes don't even remember having pulled it out of my pocket. It's almost like a sleepwalking episode, except that this kind of thing has never happened to me. So now what I find is that when I try to meditate on the subway, I have to concentrate quite a bit more. Now, I believe this kind of phenomenon is part of the so-called culture of distraction. But I actually think that it's a form of addictive behavior. And I believe that the behavior of the members of modern society, us, is becoming more and more addictive as time passes. So today I would like to consider what Sun Buddhist teachings and practices have to offer us in terms of dealing with this very serious issue. So why don't we enter into guided meditation together? So please assume the seated meditation posture. Okay, make sure you have your hands tucked in against your belly. Let it rest. Your thumbs should be touching each other. Tuck in your chin. Let the tip of your tongue gently rest against the roof of your mouth. Look straight forward. And now let's do preparation breathing together. So breathe in through your nose and fill your chests together. Hold, and then out through the mouth. Breathe in, hold, breathe out. Once again, breathe in, hold, and then breathe out through your mouth. Now let's engage abdominal breathing. So now we'll be breathing through our nose. Breathe in through your nose and extend your lower belly, hold, and then breathe out through your nose for a little bit longer. So together, breathe in, hold, and then breathe out. And with our abdominal breathing, we now engage the 이목고 화두. Recall that 이목고 means, what is this? What is this that drags my body around? What is this that thinks my thoughts and feels my feelings? The spelling for it is YIMWOTGO. So why don't we try it out loud a couple of times? So breathe in, hold, and then together breathe out, 이목고. Breathe in, hold, then breathe out, 이목고. So please continue to meditate in this fashion, doing the 이목고 화두 inside while I continue to consider today's topic. So what role can sun meditation play in helping us with our addictive behaviors? I've actually had the opportunity to teach meditation to serious drug addicts. And I have found that actually meditation is very helpful. Many, many years ago, more than 15 years ago, at the time I was living in New York and studying psychology. And I was working as a volunteer counselor in a psychiatric facility in Queens, New York. Now, this psychiatric facility catered to a very special kind of client. Our clients were people who were diagnosed with a serious drug addiction and a clinically diagnosed mental illness. So they were in so-called double trouble. And our facility was located in a very rough and dangerous part of Queens. I was told not to go there at night because it's too dangerous. And the entire front office was shielded by a wall of bulletproof glass. The reason for this was our clients were almost entirely very, very poor. They were undergoing severe economic hardship. And most of them had been taking drugs since childhood, and most of them had committed serious crimes in order to make the money to get their drugs. So sometimes when they relapsed, they would return to the clinic, the facility, and cause trouble. And sometimes they came in armed. So the bulletproof glass was there for a reason. Now, this facility was actually the endpoint of a much larger social welfare system designed to serve economically deprived people with addiction or mental health issues. And the way that it worked was this. When people like our clients, most of them get arrested at one time or another, either for using drugs or for committing a crime to get the money to buy the drugs. So when they're arrested, they're either usually high or they're exhibiting symptoms of their mental illness. So they're given a psychiatric evaluation, and once it's determined what's causing their problems, they are sent to a confined psychiatric ward. And there, the initial symptoms of their mental illness and of their addiction are addressed. They are brought back to a state of sobriety and clear-headedness. Once they complete that program, they are then moved to a live-in community. So they live in a dormitory, and they take classes and workshops, basically, where they learn how to deal with the symptoms of their mental illness and also how to deal with their addiction. So they get a basic education in learning to deal with their issues. And then once that program is completed, they were given housing, and then they come to our psychiatric facility. And the purpose of our psychiatric facility was to teach them living skills. As I said, most of these clients had been using drugs since childhood, so they never had the opportunity to learn basic things like cooking and cleaning and getting a job, or even using the phone to inquire about something. Their whole life had been about getting drugs and using them. So we were going to teach them these living skills as well as a therapeutic program to deal with their addiction, and the program was supposed to end when they successfully got a job. Now, that system was very well intentioned, but as I mentioned, our clients had very, very difficult lives. They had very, very difficult stories. I remember one elderly African-American gentleman who lost his entire family before he was 13. They were all killed in gang-related violence or some kind of street violence. And so by 13, he was addicted to drugs. So these are the kind of lives that they were leading. So when you tell people like that to stop using drugs, what you've done is you've not only taken away from them the relative pleasure or relief from pain that taking drugs gives them, but actually you've taken away from them their entire social world and their entire life structure. Because all they know is the culture of buying and selling and using drugs. All of their friends and acquaintances are users or dealers. And their whole life structure is about hanging out with these people and getting drugs. And all of a sudden, they can't do any of that, and they cannot meet the people that they know. They are thrust into a social void, into a new reality which they're completely not ready for, regardless of how many skills we may teach them. So more often than not, many, if not most, would relapse, meaning that they would take the drug or try to get the drug, get arrested, and be back in the system again, cycling through over and over. So our clients are going through this system over and over again while new ones are continuing to come in. So by the time I was in the psychiatric facility, the system was already glutted. It was overloaded. And the directors and the social workers and the people who worked there were overwhelmed, and they were just trying to push the clients onto the next person. So the system was breaking down, and what we had were hardcore prisoners coming into our psychiatric facility, people just released from prison. And these guys were a completely different kind of client. So, our normal clients were very afraid of them, and it entirely changed the atmosphere of the program. But what was interesting was that there was a common thread among all the clients. These ex-cons could be very intimidating, but they too, like the other clients, were always on the verge of despair. I remember a classroom session where all the other clients were silent because this one really big guy, was so formidable. And then he looked at me, and his eyes filled with tears, and he said, when I look at a window, all I can think of is throwing myself out that window. So they were dealing with an extremely high level of emotional pain. Now, we were trying to teach them a so-called cognitive behavioral therapy to address their addiction, where they have to identify and recognize social and physical cues or triggers that make them want to use drugs. And the idea is if they can recognize them, then they can change their behavior and not go down the path to using drugs. Now, the most interesting thing about this was that we had to teach them concentration skills, and this therapy program used concentration techniques drawn from Japanese Zen Buddhist meditative culture. So I was asked to teach these clients in so-called double trouble how to meditate. And I taught them the most basic form of meditation that I knew, which was breath counting meditation, which I've shared on this program before. And when I was with them in our workshops, by then I'd gotten to know them and kind of become friends with them. So I knew that they had very little confidence, almost no belief in themselves or any real sense of self-worth. So I thought, I'm going to have to make the shortest possible meditation session possible. The shortest time we can meditate that will still give you some benefits of meditation. So I thought, all right, I'm going to ask them to meditate for 1 minute. So I said, all right, we're going to meditate for 1 minute. And they all looked up at the ceiling and they said, a whole minute? And then I was stunned. I was very inexperienced at the time. And I thought, how could people lose so much of themselves? So I had to rethink my strategy. So I said, no time limit. Instead, we'll just all hold hands and we'll count our breaths out loud. And when we did it that way, in a kind of state of social unison, they were able to meditate far more than a minute. In fact, I think we went up to 5, 10, maybe even 15 minutes of meditation. And I found that meditation could indeed be taught to people with serious addiction, and also that it could be helpful to them. Now, what struck me most about that whole experience was actually not how dehumanized they seemed. It was actually quite the opposite. I was very surprised by how much they seemed to resemble so-called normal people. They seemed like a more extreme or exaggerated version of what everyone really is. Now, Buddhists teach that people are driven by two basic impulses, desire and aversion. So basically, people are trying either to get to something that they want, or they're trying to get away from something that they don't want. But the end result of being pulled and pushed by desire and aversion is that almost all the time, unenlightened people like ourselves want everything our way. Now, this becomes a huge problem when reality doesn't meet our expectations and desires. We experience a kind of disappointment or pain, and that triggers a vicious cycle of negative thinking, emotion, and behavior that Korean Buddhists call the 3 poisonous minds, or the 3 poisonous mindsets. Now, the interesting thing here is that the 3 poisonous minds create a pattern of thinking, emotion, and behavior that is remarkably similar to the modern psychological notion of addictive behavior. When this three poisonous minds are triggered, what we first experience is the mind of desire. And this is a completely unreasonable, blind lust or craving to have things my way and only my way. So I want this, but not that. I want things to be this way, but not that way. I want people to behave this way, but not that way. I want the world to be this way and not the way that it actually is. And if this state of mind proceeds unchecked, we fall into a state of delusion, a state of being completely captured by a totally unrealistic desire. And that triggers the next poisonous mindset, the mind of anger. And the mind of anger, in the mind of anger, one is completely consumed by a blind infantile rage that just wants to act out. And one of the most interesting things about this mind of anger is that even though it's a painful state of mind, it's actually an excruciating state of mind, we try to make it bigger. Many, if not most of us, will act or think or feel in such a way to make that state of anger bigger and more intense. We fuel it with fantasies of revenge and payback, and if that goes unchecked, our minds are eventually completely filled with hatred and rage. And then that brings us into the third poisonous mindset. And here, what happens is that we fall into a state of almost complete delusion. We now have zero disregard for the consequences of our actions, and we will act on our emotions, whether they be of desire or rage. And ultimately, the behavior that follows from this is almost always harmful and produces suffering not only for oneself but for others as well. We say the wrong thing. We do the wrong thing. We may take drugs. We may shout at or hit someone. We may take something that doesn't belong to us. We may cheat on our spouse or our lover. On a more microscopic level, we may finish the entire bag of cookies. We may stay up all night surfing the internet. We may go binge shopping. We may go through a string of meaningless relationships. We may stay at our workplace all the time and never go home. Whether the resulting behavior is catastrophic or simply detrimental, the common thread that runs through all of this is that we're so blinded by the three poisonous minds that we will seek short-term, usually very momentary pleasure or relief at the expense of long-term damage. Long-term damage to our physical and mental health, long-term damage to our social relationships, damage to our financial situation, damage to our careers, you name it. So Buddhists describe the natural functioning of the unenlightened mind in terms very similar to the modern notion of an addict psychology, where we develop an unrealistic desire that leads us through a state of rage and frustration into a final state of almost complete delusion and denial, where we act in such a way as to harm ourselves and others. And when we do that, when we inevitably suffer the pain that is the consequence of our foolish actions, it starts to cycle all over again. We go look for another object of desire to still that pain. And so this cycle goes over and over and over, just like a cycle of addiction. This is an amazingly destructive cycle of behavior. Now, what's relevant here is that the entire system of Buddhist teachings and practices was designed to cure this kind of mind. So it's no coincidence to me that so many Buddhist teachings and practices have been imported into modern psychotherapy and adapted to address modern mental disorders. Okay, so why don't we think about that and take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into the specifics of how we can use Sun Buddhist teachings and practices to deal with our own addictive behaviors. Hello again. So let's once more re-engage our guided meditation. So please, once again, hold your posture. Engage your abdominal breathing. Now engage your 이 무엇고 화두. In meditation practice, for us beginning meditators, usually the first issue is that we feel that there are too many distracting thoughts coming up, too many voices in our head, too many emotions or imagery. And we tend to think of these as obstacles to our practice. So in our meditation, I would like to offer a very simple Buddhist teaching that will help us not to get frustrated in our meditation practice. And the way this teaching goes is like this. Distracting thoughts are the firewood that is burned in the flame of the hwadu to cook the rice of enlightenment. Instead of thinking that our extraneous thoughts and emotions are some kind of impediment and trying to fight with it or ignore it, imagine that it's just part of the process. Just let it be and continue to work with your hwadu, and it will be consumed in your hwadu and help you on your path to enlightenment. So once again, distracting thoughts are the firewood that is burned in the flame of the hwadu to cook the rice of enlightenment. So why don't we return, please continue to meditate and breathe, and I will return to our topic for today, which is how can sun meditation be used to cope with our addictive behaviors. And now, before going in detail into that, I would like to clarify a few things first. First of all, I am not going to claim that sun meditation can be used as a standalone therapy for serious addiction. In advanced cases of clinically diagnosed addiction, whether it be drugs or gambling or whatever, I think we need to go to the professionals. We need to go to the psychiatrists, the psychotherapists, the social workers. But based on my experience, I have found that sun meditation can be a powerful supplement and support to whatever primary intervention program that we use. So I would like to make that very clear. I'm not saying that sun meditation will cure all forms of addiction by itself. So what we need is a working definition of the kind of addictive behavior that I would like to address today. And I would like to simply say that we're caught up in addictive behavior when we can't stop doing something we know is not good for us. We want to stop, but somehow we can't. And that is a very weird state of mind. At all times, it's us, it's our minds, making all of the decisions, initiating all actions. But somehow we feel powerless and out of control. It's almost as if something is possessing us, even though at every single moment, it's us who's choosing to do these things that we know will hurt us. So how do we cope with this very odd thing? In addressing this question, we finally come to the main topic of today. I would like to now introduce a very simple and basic Sun Buddhist teaching or concept. And this teaching will help us, first of all, to meditate better, and secondly, it will help us learn how to use our meditation on the addictive behaviors that are troubling us. Now, in Korean, this concept is called 일념 단속, which I loosely translate as directing one thought. Directing one thought means directing your attention at the target of your choice, which for us meditators is the 이 무엇고 화두, and keeping your attention there. Now, when we use words like focus and concentration, there is an implication of a kind of muscular mental effort that is both tense and intense. But this Korean Buddhist concept of directing one thought is more subtle than that. It's not about intensity of focus. It's about constancy, continuity, to shine your attention on something like a steady, uninterrupted beam of light. So when we're doing imoko on our out-breath during meditation, we don't need to exert so much mental effort and force. We only need to exert the amount of mental effort or force that we would use to, say, visualize our best friend's face. That's not very hard. Or visualize what our room looks like. Or visualize what my desk looks like. You don't have to try to pound your mind into the hwadu. When we're doing imoko on our out-breath, rather than going for intensity of focus, we strive for consistency. So when other thoughts rise up, when imagery rise up that threaten to distract us, we simply return back to the imoko hwadu. We simply redirect our attention back to the hwadu over and over and over again. And this trains us to learn how to direct our attention and keep it there. So the most important factor here is not intensity or passion, but patience. The willingness to repeat the same thing over and over and over again until we get good at it. Now, in Sun Buddhism, when we pay attention to something, when we put our awareness on something, that activity, that mental activity is likened to shining a beam of light. And the light of our awareness or the light of our attention has a very special property. It energizes whatever target it's pointed at. So if we direct our attention, the light of our attention, at the negative emotions created by the three poisonous mindsets, we're going to cause those emotions to grow. And now, directing our attention at our emotions means wallowing in our emotions, drowning in them, immersing ourselves in them. That's what it means to pay attention to our emotions. So when you feel yourself completely plunging into your emotion, that means you're directing your attention at it. And when that happens, and if that keeps going unchecked, those unpleasant emotions will grow and they will proliferate, and eventually they'll run out of control, and we will find ourselves in the vicious cycle of addictive behavior that is the characteristic of the three poisonous minds. But for a trained meditator, we know how to redirect our attention. So we will redirect our attention back to our imoko hwadu. And that's all we have to do. Because when we do that, then our negative emotions are deprived of their fuel source, their energy source. We don't have to do anything more after that. They will simply wither, disintegrate, and disappear over time. So once again, the issue is patience. Can we keep our attention on our hwadu while waiting for these negative emotions and thoughts to subside and finally disappear? Being able to direct your attention at the imoko hwadu and keep it there is the secret of willpower and discipline. Willpower is not about intensity and passion. Willpower is about the ability to remember our goal, which in our case is our hwadu, at all times, no matter what. If you want to remember your goal at all times, no matter what, you have to know how to pay attention to it at all times, no matter what. And that's what meditation is all about. We want to keep our attention on our hwadu at all times, regardless of the waves of desire and aversion, regardless of the waves of negative thought, emotion, and imagery. Now, when we do this over time, making a daily practice of it, incorporating it into our daily activity, always keeping our attention on our hwadu, then what will happen is overall, our thoughts and emotions will subside and we'll become more calm. And the interesting thing is, the more calm we become, the more our emotions and thoughts subside, our meditation becomes both more relaxed and more powerful. This is why in the Korean Buddhist meditation halls, we say of an expert meditator that he or she is, quote, at rest. The waves of their emotions and thoughts have subsided and their minds have become like a bright, brilliant, shining mirror under the sun. Now, if ordinary folks like us also want to develop a mind like that, then what we need to do is make meditation a part of our lives. Specifically, what that means is we need to set aside a time and space every day to practice formal seated meditation, and we need to make a very robust effort to try to hold, to try to think of the imoko hwadu at all times during our daily activity. And when we do that, when we keep our attention on our hwadu all the time, we naturally begin to turn away from our addictive cycles of behavior. We naturally lose interest in them. And the reason for that is this. When you use meditation to achieve that level of focus, clarity, and stability, we become too self-aware and too aware of reality to be fooled by the delusions and illusions of the three poisonous minds. We know, not just in our heads, but we see it, we feel it, that eating one more cookie really won't make us feel better. Staying up all night on the internet is really not a good idea. We feel it, and as time progresses, as we persist in our practice, we begin to long for wholesome, positive, healthy, bright things. And we begin to feel repulsed by the dark, negative, addictive behaviors that we once found so perversely attractive and exciting. And then in this process, our minds naturally begin to develop plans and ideas to make our lives and ourselves more happy and bright. This is how meditation can help us in addressing our cycles of addictive behavior. Now, in conclusion, I would like to introduce one last Sun Buddhist teaching. And this teaching is the overall strategy that Korean Sun Buddhism uses to eradicate the three poisonous minds. And actually, that's one of the working definitions of enlightenment. The eradication, the complete removal of the three poisonous minds is the state of enlightenment. So when we address our addictive behaviors through meditation, we are heading toward enlightenment, and we should always bear that in mind. We're not just trying to get rid of the addictive behaviors, we want to get enlightened. So the teaching that I would like to introduce is this. It consists of two phrases. The first phrase is, the familiar must become unfamiliar. What's familiar to us right now is our cycles of addictive behavior, this habit of choosing short-term pleasure at the expense of long-term suffering. And through meditation, through the practice that I described above, this begins, as we become more and more alert and awake, our addictive behaviors become repulsive to us, they become uncomfortable to us, they become strange and off-putting to us. In other words, they've become unfamiliar. The familiar has become unfamiliar. The second phrase is, the unfamiliar must become familiar. What's unfamiliar to us beginning meditators right now is Sun Buddhist meditation. We find this meditation at the beginning to be kind of awkward and unnatural and constraining. But if we stick with it, then we get used to it, and finally it becomes second nature. What does becoming second nature mean? It becomes part of our minds and our bodies, part of the way we do things and live. So the unfamiliar has become familiar. In fact, the unfamiliar has become intimate to us. It has become one with us. This is the direction that we are trying to go. And as with all things that are worth doing, the key is persistence. No matter how lost we may feel in our lives or in the way we live our lives, no matter how we may feel that we have failed at something, no matter how we feel that we may stumble or falter, the trick is always never to give up. Always get up again. Always try again. This is the promise made to us by the Sun Masters of history, most recently our teacher, Sun Master Songdam, that if you just don't quit, you will get there. We will escape the three poisonous minds and get to enlightenment. So on a final note, I would like to say to all of our studio audience members and to you viewers at home, let's never give up on ourselves, and let's never give up on each other. Okay, that's my talk for today. Thank you very much. And now we will finish with our closing session of meditation. Okay, and I will finish with the traditional Korean Buddhist greeting, may we all attain the Buddha. And now with 3 strikes of this chukbi, we will enter into our closing meditation. So please hold your meditation posture once more and continue our meditation.